Alright, it's time for an update and forecast on the Hughes fire. This one started yesterday at around 10:42 a.m. At least that's when the Watch Duty app made this update. And it quickly grew to over 10,000 acres, which is a rapidly spreading fire, especially when you're thinking about January. But once again, in Southern California, we haven't seen much rain anytime recently, so everything's very dry down there. And then on top of that, we've had some very windy conditions as well. Still actually pretty windy out there at the moment. So we're going to look at, is the fire still active? And speaking of rain, I may have some good news for you, but that's a bit of a spoiler, so we'll get there. So containment has already jumped to 36%. That's actually amazing, considering the weather conditions that they have down there and the fact that this grew to 10,000 acres as quickly as it did. The fact that it's already at 36 is quite surprising. It's also surprising to see that they already have 1,200 personnel on this fire, which is most likely a big part of the reason that it's already down to, or it's already up to 36% containment. I imagine they were just blasting this with air attack as well. When the red flag warning got into effect, I'm sure they just had all the aircraft on standby waiting to see if something happened. But I think this is the best map that I've been able to find, kind of a 3D view here. Definitely going to butcher the name of this area, Castaic Lake. Any locals, let me know if I'm saying that right. But you can see how it just burned right up to the lakeside in a lot of these places. Unfortunately, there are some locations where you can see some structures highlighted in white now underneath the fire perimeter. But I will say it doesn't look like the fire perimeter actually pushes into where we have the largest amount of structures, which is on the southern side. And that's also surprising because the wind was trying to push the fire in this direction. It would have been a lot worse if we had had maybe a spot from this part of the fire jump over Castaic Lake right here, and then the northerly winds would have pushed the fire straight down into these communities. But as it turned out, it almost skipped around to the right, and then they were able to stop it before it really pushed into a lot of these structures, and before it reached, it looks like that's the 5 right there. So probably should have been the first thing that I showed, but this is the satellite imagery from the day today, and you can't even see any smoke coming off of the fire. You can't even really tell where the fire would be on that map. So I think a better way to see if the fire's still active is looking at our CalTopo map right here. This is the perimeter before I turn on the satellite imagery to see if there's any heat coming off of it right now. I do want to look at the structures. Yeah, it looks like there were some structures, or are some structures underneath the fire perimeter on this more southern side. Just because you have structures underneath the fire perimeter, though, doesn't mean they're destroyed. A lot of times you can have low severity burning, high severity burning, even some islands where there's complete unburned material. So I haven't heard any numbers on structures destroyed at this point yet. But the key thing that I was looking at on that other map, look at all the structures on that southwestern side right there and how the fire perimeter comes right up to them, but it doesn't look like it actually pushes into those communities at all. So that's, I'd say, great to see right there. Now let's zoom out and let's turn on the heat and see where this has been active recently. And that right there is good news. So the first piece of good news right there is yellow means where there was heat more than 24 hours ago. So it shows that this fire spread very quickly, and then it seems like they got it out very quickly. There are some red stars up on that northern side right there, which means heat in the last 12 hours. The reason I'm not too concerned about that, though, is if we look at the wind plot, the wind is still pushing from the northeast, which would try to push that just right into the lake that we have right here. And then on top of that, towards the north, if we look at all satellites, let's turn the wind plot off. So that's where we are seeing some heat at the moment. That yellow square right there represents the most recent heat that we have. It's also overestimates how much heat's coming off of the fire. But the reason I want to show There's very few structures on this northern side. So if you had to pick a side of the fire for there to still be a little heat coming off it, you'd pick that northern side. But I mean, to be honest, I'm not too worried about this fire. Really, it's looks like almost all of the heat is already gone from it. It looks like the area that had the largest amount of structures dodged a bullet by them stopping that perimeter before it went into there. And the containment's already up to 36%. And we're going to start to see some improving weather conditions moving forward. So I'm seeing a lot of good markers for the Hughes fire. With that being said, there are still evacuation orders in place. They've been downgrading some of them already. But anytime there's orders, it's still important to take those seriously because, I mean, it is still California. You never know what can happen. Looking at the weather conditions, though, we are starting to see the winds come down slightly. That might be a surprise when you look at that one to the north of Castaic Lake, and it's still showing 38 miles per hour. But earlier today, we had a 53 mile per hour gust. And look at that minimum relative humidity, 6%. That is about as dry as you're ever going to see. I wonder if some of the other stations were that low as well. Wow. So that one's 31 mile per hour. 7% minimum relative humidity. What might even be more surprising, though, is maximum relative humidity 9%, meaning it was single digits even during the overnight and early morning hours, that's some of the driest conditions I've ever seen. So the fact that they were able to take what burned 10,000 acres and reduce the heat on it that quickly is pretty amazing right there. Now let's see what's going to happen to the weather moving forward. So this does still show some wind gusts out there right now, but let's watch what happens overnight. You start to see those winds really calm down, and by tomorrow morning, it looks like it's getting even calmer. These are wind gusts showing around 18 miles per hour, which means your sustained winds, 4 miles per hour. Yeah, so if they were able to handle those dry conditions today with relative humidity in the single digits, with wind gusts around 40 to 50 miles per hour, then I see no reason why the situation shouldn't continue to improve as we move forward. Now, with that being said, I should always cover my bases when there is technically still a red flag in place through Friday at 10 a.m. And this isn't just a worry for the Hughes fire. This is now maybe for the broader area of Southern California. Oh, first thing I probably should have said, Hughes fire, Los Angeles and Ventura counties. But now we are kind of looking at the county level here, where, you just got a little sneak peek of the forecast. Didn't want you to see that one yet. There is still a red flag warning in place. When we looked at our observations, there are still some gusty winds out there. So I'm still keeping an eye on Southern California just to make sure no new fires don't pop up. I mean, you look at that, that's a 53 mile per hour wind gust. Their minimum relative humidity 3%. It's amazing these numbers are even real. That one's 64 mile per hour. And we're still seeing some winds down in Southern California. 40, 50, 53, 32, 29, 49. So, yeah, it seems like the Hughes, I don't want to say it's wrapped up at this point because there was still a little heat on that northern side, but I'd say it's just about there. And then we'll keep an eye on Southern California because there is still that red flag in place through 10 a.m., but then it does start to look like those winds calm down. And let's see what happens to the relative humidity tomorrow. Are we going to get any relief? Nope. Looks like it's incredibly dry again. So even though it's not as windy tomorrow, that's why they're canceling the red flag at 10 a.m., it does look like it's still incredibly dry. So there is still the potential for some fire activity tomorrow afternoon when your relative humidity is 6%. Yeah, and your fuels are very dry, fires can still start even though it is January. Although with it being January, the period of time during the day where you'll have peak fire activity typically won't last as long as if you're in summer and you have more hours of daylight and just peak heat out there. So I think that's kind of the fire situation there. But now I want to show what I've kind of been teasing throughout this entire video right here, and that's there's actually some rain on the way for Southern California. At least it looks that way right now. I'm knocking on wood as I speak because we know Southern California certainly needs it. Saturday looks like it's a 30% chance. Saturday night, 90. Sunday, 90. Sunday night, 70. Monday, rain likely. And then Monday night, slight chance. So first thing I notice, it's not just a 6-hour or 1-day event or potential. You love to see when it's stretched out like that because the longer your rain lasts, the more that moisture is going to be able to soak into the soils, which will eventually soak into the fuels and hopefully help us out considering how dry things have been down there. Southern California needs a good rain. So let's actually look at this. I believe it has to do with this low right here. Watch what happens. Oops. So let's watch what happens as that low kind of shifts off of the coast. Lows have counterclockwise motion, so some of that moisture is going to be getting picked up from the ocean and then pushed into the coastline like that. So it comes in, pushes it in, and let's see that's some rain for Southern California. And clicking through, looks like the low just kind of hovers over Central California. So it continues to push some of that moisture in there, and then it moves off. Now, I will say it doesn't look like it's one of those big storms with a cold front that brings heavy rainfall. It's certainly not an atmospheric river or anything like that. But if we look at the rainfall totals, I mean, that's pretty good. A lot of that green that you see right there, that's going to be in the 0.2 to 0.4 range. And then some of that blue is going to be maybe upwards around an inch. And then I believe the National Weather Service had a pretty good graphic for this one. Rain expected this weekend. Zoom in there. Yeah, there looks like they're showing a lot of places around 0.2 to 0.5. And then around Long Beach, even maybe 0.88. So yeah, there is some good news on the horizon. I'd say there's also mostly good news for the Hughes fire. Still the red flag warning in place right now, though, so we'll watch the winds and the dry conditions overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning. But then let's just keep our fingers crossed for that rain on the way. Hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.